Expectations. We all have them, but did you know they hold a lot of power? Way back in the 1960s, Harvard researchers told teachers that certain randomly selected children were smart. And would you believe those kids did better, not only in the classroom, but also on standardized IQ tests? Our expectations can also set our marriages up for success or failure. Let's talk about it. The one thing I remember from our premarital counseling is discussing expectations. Our counselor told us that each person enters a marriage with certain expectations, which have often come from their families of origin. For instance, if in your family of origin, your mom handled the checkbook, you might expect that finances will be handled by your wife. But what if your wife has the exact opposite expectation because her dad handled the money? These expectations need to be discussed, or you're headed for conflict early in your marriage when neither of you takes control of finance. If you go into marriage expecting to succeed, you will be far more likely to succeed. If you have doubts, you have almost doomed your marriage to failure. Don't believe me? Medical professionals call this the nocebo effect. If a patient is having a medical procedure, one that's widely used and highly effective, but the doctor presents the procedure in a negative light, the likelihood that the procedure will fail increases dramatically. Here's a big one. If you enter marriage, or any relationship for that matter, with the expectation that this other person is going to make you happy, dun dun dun, you have probably set yourselves up for failure. The truth is, no person or troll can make you happy all of the time. No matter who you marry, your spouse is bound to let you down. Life will get hard. Your spouse won't always respond in the manner you want. No matter how hard you try to make them perfect, no spouse is perfect. God is perfect, and it isn't even God's job to make you happy. So why in the world would we place that expectation on a human? Rather than happiness, we ought to focus on holiness. Here's what Paul says in Ephesians 5:25 and 26. For husbands, this means love your wives, just as Christ loved the church. He gave up his life for her to make her holy and clean, washed by the cleansing of God's word. Holiness. That's what Christ wants for us, and that's what we should want for each other. As we grow in holiness, we grow in wholeness. And as that happens, I think we'll find ourselves a lot more happy. Pause the video and discuss these questions. Okay, I'm going to tackle it, the passage that all wives dread. Let's back up to Ephesians 5:21. And further, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. For wives, this means submit to your husbands as to the Lord. Oh snap, half of you are now glaring at me and demanding that your life group leader stop the video. Ladies, please hang with me. First, we don't have time in a video like this to go into every case-by-case scenario. If you are married to an unbelieving spouse, there are certainly instances in which this isn't going to work because your spouse is not going to be living by God's law. In addition, no one is called to submit to any form of abuse or sinful behavior. If you are living in a situation where abuse or sinful behavior is occurring, please come speak to a pastor. That being said, let's take another peek at the passage. Did you catch the first line? Submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. And then if we jump down a couple verses, we read, for husbands, this means love your wives just as Christ loved the church. So this isn't just saying wives submit. On the contrary, wives are to submit and husbands are to submit. Submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. We seem to get hung up on the word submit and miss the fact that we are all called to submit to God and to each other. I think the real heart of this issue goes all the way back to the Garden of Eden. We don't want to submit to anyone, even God. That's what got Adam and Eve into trouble in the first place, and it has caused issues and brokenness ever since. The Greek word for submit is hupotasso, which conveys the idea of ordering oneself under another or falling into rank. I kind of like that army lingo of falling into rank. In the army, everyone cannot be the general. God gets to be the general, and we all submit or place ourselves in a rank below him. But everyone can't be the colonel either. Can you imagine an army where everyone was vying to be the colonel? It's not gonna work. So wives submit by placing themselves under their husband's leadership. Why? Verse 21 said, out of reverence for Christ. Not because you revere your husband, though I hope you do. No, we submit out of reverence for Christ. This is not a bad thing. No way. This is recognizing our God-given rank. Because God is the general, we follow his commands. The husband has the weight and responsibility of being the colonel. Ladies, in a God-honoring marriage, this should bring us freedom. God has placed a colonel over us to lead us in this battle we call life. I think we often misinterpret this as women because we see the leader as the one with all the power. That just isn't so. As the lieutenant colonel, you wield quite a lot of power as you advise the colonel. But at the end of the day, the colonel, the husband, is the one who answers to God for how he led in your marriage. But this doesn't mean he is the boss. The husband is to submit to his wife by loving her, just as Christ loved the church, which means that the husband, sorry guys, actually has the tougher role. He has to give himself up for his wife. As colonel, he shows her love by putting her needs ahead of his own. Even as the leader, he submits by ordering his own needs under those of his wife. And any husband that does this well will have a wife who is willing to let him be the colonel. If we expect our marriages to succeed and thrive in the manner God intended, then following God's design for mutual submission is a necessity. Remember, like we talked about in worship, our marriages are an illustration of the relationship between Jesus and the church. Take some time and talk about it.